Good morning, everyone. First, it's a pleasure to be here and to share ideas about a so important topic for the future. So my presentation is very well fitted with the two previous ones, and especially with yours, because it's about the reciprocal relationships between SMEs and territories. A huge literature brings evidence about the contribution of SMEs to local economies. Another set of papers shows that SMEs growth and performance depend on local conditions. So I am going to illustrate this bidirectional relationship and the heterogeneity that may exist at a subnational level. I mean that there are some statistical regularities showed by empirical research, empirical papers, but what is interesting is to focus on outliers and also on the different regimes that may emerge from empirical analysis. So the results, the different maps I'm going to present today come from a research program we have launched in my research institute with other colleagues, senior and junior researcher, of course, but also with postdoctoral and PhD students. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this research. So during the presentation, I'm going to try to provide a triple point of view about the relationships between SMEs and local characteristics. First of all, I'm going to focus on an indicator of SMEs characteristic, which is soundness, robustness, or survival perspectives on SMEs. And I am going to show that they are connected to the regional context, showing some result coming from research undertook at the European level, a comparison between the NUTS2 regions of 4 European countries. Then I'm going to focus on some results obtained thanks to French data computed at the so-called employment area level. I'm going to define it more precisely next, and I will show that there is a strong relationship between the local resilience and some indicators measuring local resistance and new firm entry, so entrepreneurship, let's say. So everybody here is convinced that firm trajectories do not result of a unique or a single set of reasons. 3 families of factors of explained variables have been enhanced by the literature. Of course, firm-specific factors are very well known since the numerous empirical checks of the so-called Gibrat's law. So I won't develop this aspect. We are all informed about the results of this research. There are also industrial-specific factors linked to market evolution, intra-industry diversification that helps to understand at a mesoeconomic level why in some industries companies expand or create more jobs than in other industries. My concern here is linked to local specific factors. We have studied with a colleague the importance of the financial context in Italian province to show that SMEs developed and survive in different ways according to the diversity and the development of the banking system. Agglomeration economies, of course, have been shown to be a major explanatory variable in SMEs growth rate. And generally, local conditions are shown to be important and possibly explaining the SMEs growth rate. So I have to precise that when I talked about SMEs growth rate, I mainly focus on employment. Why? Because in international comparison, employment is less submitted to institutional or accounting rules. So that's why I prefer to talk about job creation. And in addition, sales are not measured in the same way depending on you are a standalone or a company included in a business group. So my main indicator in measuring SMEs growth is employment growth rate. So what about firm robustness? What is firm robustness? There are several indicators of the capacity of a company to survive in the future, but one of the main index is the Altman Z-score. Various versions are available to compute the probability of survival or the risk of default of a company, and in one version provided by Altman and other co-authors in 1983, they propose a score dedicated to small and medium-sized companies. So it is computed using a discriminant analysis, and the way to compute the score is written on the slide. There are different accounting and financial information composing the scores. There are some weights associated to the different ratios. And we can see here on the map the zeta score of different companies computed at the NUTS 3 level for 4 European countries, Italy, France, Germany, and Belgium, observed during a 6 year period, 2010 to 2015. So we computed the zeta score for an unbalanced panel made of almost 90,000 observations. And here you can see the result on the map. First of all, I kept the England, even we didn't took it into account for the estimation, not because of the Brexit, but because there were many outliers in the English counties. So you can see that, of course, there is a national effect looking at this result, but there is also a subnational level, because as you may see, for instance, for France, the country is divided in 2 parts, the east and the western part, which is an information about the subnational heterogeneity that has to be taken into account to study the phenomenon. So what are the main results of the empirical analysis we made to explain why in some areas the zeta score is higher than in other areas? To make the empirical study, we mix in a multi-level model, so a hierarchical linear model, some individual and some regional information. So there is at least 2 levels in explaining the individual result. the firm characteristics and the local characteristic. And mixing these two levels is a good exercise to explain the result, because the first information we get estimating the ICCs, so the intra-class correlation coefficient, is that location really matters in explaining the differences of Altman score according to the spatial unit. More than 12% of the difference result from the local context and not from the individual characteristic, which is already an information. And when we run the estimation with individual variables, I mean firm size, firm age, firm industry, and local information, the education at, in the spatial unit, the number or the share of high-tech industry, the GDP per capita. And when we introduced fixed effect, temporal, sectoral, and regional effect, we may see that a higher level of education measured by the share of population with a tertiary degree and a higher rate of high-tech SMEs positively influence the level of Altman score reached by the company. And clusterizing the estimation and making a difference between low knowledge, medium knowledge, intensive regions, we show that these results are particularly robust and strong when we look at low knowledge and medium knowledge region. I mean that when you are already located in a very strong region, increasing these two explanatory variables does not influence the result. Whereas if you are a company located in a less advantaged region, the efforts made to increase the education and the rate of high-tech SMEs have an influence on at the individual level, since it increases the Altman score measure at the firm level. Surprisingly, we haven't been able to find any significant effect for two variables generally admitted in the literature. The first one is the density measured by the number of workers by square kilometers. We haven't noticed anything, but we have a reason to suspect that the spatial unit is not appropriate to determine this kind of effect. And also, there is no income effect, income being measured by the GDP per capita, probably for the same reason. We have to use a more narrow spatial unit, a smaller spatial unit, to document this kind of effect. So these are the main results. Local conditions influence firm robustness. What about job creation in French employment area? Choosing this spatial unit helps to get rid from the previous criticism I've made about the NUTS2 or NUTS3 European unit. What is an employment area? An employment area is a spatial unit where at least 60% of the people aging between 25 and 64 live and work. So it is computed by the National Institute for Statistics. It's not an administrative unit, such as NUTS2 or NUTS3, European Territorial Unit. It's a kind of ad hoc spatial unit. And from time to time, there are changes because the economic conditions are changing, so that up to now, we are endowed with 304 employment areas in France corresponding to these economically consistent spatial units. You can see here the French, the employment growth rate in these spatial units. In green, the employment areas where the employment growth rate is the higher. In red, where it's the lower. This employment growth rate has been computed for SMEs only, since we have a special accreditation from the National Institute of Statistics, which allow us to use individual data and to break them down just like we like to. So. The rate for SMEs job creation in French employment area is, of course, higher along the Atlantic Ocean and, in general, along the Mediterranean coast. And you can see that there is a kind of spatial clustering since the central areas exhibit lower employment growth rates than coastal areas. Another information narrowly connected to the topic of this conference, if you have in mind where are the main cities in France, so Paris in the middle, Toulouse, the big green spot, Lyon also, they exhibit the higher employment growth rate, which confirm the presentation or the results obtained by the previous speakers in this session. We run several empirical models, and what are the main results obtained, trying to explain why in some regions the employment growth rate is higher than in other regions. There are some explanatory variables that have a quite important responsibility in explaining these differences over the post-crisis period. In regions where the share of employees in the manufacturing industry is high, they are less likely to create a job. There is clearly a sectoral effect. On the opposite, when the rate of SMEs is higher, the probability to create more jobs is also higher, the so-called SMEs effect you told about. The government structure also matters, since in employment areas where the share of business group is higher, the employment growth rate is lower. And there is also a density effect, which we did not observe at the European level, since a higher density positively influences the employment growth rate. It is also the case for the level of income. So, looking at this smaller spatial unit, we are able to confirm the main result of the literature. What about the resilience? Resilience is a concept developed by various authors, among them Martin in a paper published in 2012. There are different indicators helping to measure local resilience. What does that mean? Local resilience is the capacity to resist to a shock and to recover after the shock. So I'm going to focus about recovery here. When I measure the recovery as the rebound at the end of the period, I mean, it corresponds to the difference between the employment growth rate between the first year during the shock, to 2009, and the current year. In this research, it corresponds to 2015. So we still find the same picture than for the employment growth rate, but we have additional information running the estimations on the period using a quantile regression. It is a research, sorry for the source, conducted with Marcus Desjardins at the University of Namur, and we measure the different index of recovery for the French employment areas, and we show that the rate of manufacturing industry negatively influences the recovery, whereas the entrepreneurship measured by the net local effect of entry rate at this level positively influences the capacity of any territory to resist to an external macro shock. So the main result of this research is that entrepreneurship helps territories to resist to a macroeconomic crisis. So the conclusions of this different research is that, first of all, local context drive SMEs' growth rate. Secondly, that the local resilience is significantly and positively explained by the entrepreneurial orientation of a spatial unit. That density, specialization, concentration, and other correlates have a lower influence on the final result, and that the determinants of recovery are not the same for all territories. The mix of the explanatory variables depends on the growth rate observed at the territorial level. So we consider that we have reached the result showing that entrepreneurship is able to explain economic growth, development, and prosperity of the companies and of territories. Thank you very much.